This is about 10 years of my life. It was a very difficult book, and I started writing it 5 days after 9/11 happened, because I wanted to know who were the people who did it. And I realized as I was searching for the answers that if I look at the people as the people, then I can't see anything. The same way as if we were to look at what is happening in Egypt right now, we see masses of people, right? And we think about masses of people. And it's very hard to understand what is really happening. I think that we can understand each other much better if we can zoom in and see a person. And from learning about this specific person, we can learn about the people. This is why I wanted to imagine a life that leads to such horrific choices. And I think that the metaphor is easy enough to grasp, because when I look at all of you as the group, you know, you become a group. But when I zoom in, I see Jane Elkin here, and I see Claudia here, and I see Lois. I think I know most of you in this group. I see Kathy, and I see Amelia, and Rick, and you know, and when you zoom in, you really connect with the real person, right? With the real person, with the real life. So I decided to learn as much as I could about the Middle East, of course, history of the Middle East, and about the culture. And I realized as I was learning and studying and doing my research that I cannot learn anything that I need to learn unless I speak to people that live there. And so I did contact people from the Middle East, and I made friends. Now I have friends in Israel and in Palestine, in Iran, in Egypt, and in Afghanistan. So when I wanted to know what is actually happening in Egypt right now, I contacted my young friend who used to help me, was helping me for 2 years. It's a funny story about how we met. I asked him, because I know if I can get his story, that I will understand what is happening in Egypt right now much better than if I listen to the news, right? So what I would like to do is I will read two excerpts. One of them will be from the time when Tahir, the main character, is 7 years old, and he travels to the desert with his father to find out about what it means to be a man. One of the stories his father tells him is about the desert. So I would like to read this one. And the second one will be a little bit different, because it will be a story of a Polish guy who becomes Tahir's friend. His name is Marek Kowalski. Because what I would like to show in this novel, and I hope that I succeeded at least to some extent, that we are similar, really, all of us. We can come from Russia, from Poland, we can come from Egypt, on the very basic human level of the essence of who we are as humans. We are really very similar. So I will show you, maybe I will read two fragments from two sort of childhoods, two excerpts, as my boyfriend tells me, don't say fragments, excerpts. So first the story that relates to Tahir. And Tahir, by the way, Tahir in Arabic means pure. So that was what was interesting for me, to see how a beautiful child and a young man can become a monster. Right? So this is a story that his father told him. The most controversial and the most discussed was the one about the thirst. He remembered this one especially well, since he first heard it during the memorable journey into the desert. Only the people of the desert can grasp the truth of life. His father looked into the starry sky, putting his hands behind his head and stretching himself on the ground. It's a necessary survival skill, and an art required to build a meaningful life. His words were slow and quiet. But most people, greedy and imprudent, lead their lives unconsciously, and that's the time when But most people, greedy and imprudent, lead their life unconsciously, and that's the time when the water turns into lead. Into lead? Yes. The father looked straight into Tahir's eyes. The water turns into lead when there is too much of it and when there is not enough of it. Impossible! The boy eagerly pointed out the contradiction and his own misunderstanding. Only the people of the desert know the exact amount of water that won't turn into lead, his father continued slowly. They know exactly what amount of water is essential, and they know this is the amount, exactly the amount they should take with them. People not familiar with the desert either take too much water or not enough. Those who run out of water are imprudent. They always go farther than they should, and that's why they never come back. Those who take too much water, rapacious ones, overburden themselves and their animals, slowing down the journey dangerously, never arriving at their destination. His father looked at him always before the last sentence. Remember, this is very important. You must become a man of the desert before you take upon the journey into the desert. You must become a man of the desert before you take upon yourself the journey into life. Prepare before you go. So this is an excerpt of the story, and the other one is about Marek Kowarski, who decided to kill Russians during the war between Russia and Afghanistan, because he thought that they killed his mother in the 70s, 1970, during the shipyard workers' uprising in Poland. And it was a lie, because the people who actually killed his mother weren't Russians, they were Poles. But it's easy for us to believe in a lie and justify our actions rather than say that we shouldn't be doing what we are doing. So he wanted a revenge, and he decided to believe the story so he could kill. So I also show in this book, hopefully, the commonalities that breed violence and why we make the choices that we make. So I will read you a story from, again, from Marek's childhood. Because I also think, as you see on the cover, there is a child looking into the Twin Towers, right in the fire, that everything really starts in our childhood. The influences that we have in our lives when we are children. This is what shapes us. And I see at least one child here. I'm very happy she's here with us. So I will read this story. So, my mother woke me up with a kiss on the cheek. That's the way she always did it. First I would feel the soft kiss, and then I would smell her chamomile hair. Usually, she didn't have to support herself on her hands, leaning to kiss me. But that day, I remember she used both hands on both sides of me. "Mommy, are you okay?" I asked her, opening my eyes. "Oh, I'm just a little tired," she said, smiling sadly. "Your brother is growing fast in my belly. He is getting heavy." She kissed my other cheek. "Brother or sister, I meant to say." She smiled, the sweetest smile ever. She added sister because I was dreaming of a brother, and she didn't want me to be disappointed in case it was a girl. "We want a healthy baby," she used to say to me. "I am a girl, and we play very well together, don't we?" And that was the best argument she had, because it was the truth. Playing with her was heaven, always. We played by the river, where the schools of tadpoles shimmered in crystal waters above the golden smooth rocks of the bottom, and in the forests, where soft moss invited our touching hands, and on the beach, where white sand turned into ingenious fortresses with numerous corridors and dozens of carefully crafted portals and windows. And in the village, where we plaited the manes of Grandpa's horses, whispering soft words into their ears, pretending to be the Indians from the book we had just read. And in the orchard where everything smelled of pinkish white flowers of the early spring. And in Tatra Mountains on the long trip to Gevant Peak, where we rinse our feet with water from tin canisters. And even on the train where we were robbed and somebody stole my favorite kite. "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart," she said. "We will make you an even nicer one as soon as we get home." She wiped my tears with a handkerchief, with the Wawel dragon on the center. How about that? I didn't realize that the memory of the most beautiful words of love I have ever heard would become the words of the most unbearable pain in my life. There was so much compassion in her, so much love for everyone, not only for me, even for strangers, and most of all for my father, even when he would come back home drunk. Sometimes we would hear him on the staircase talking to the neighbor a little bit too loud. "Mr. Mietek, I made a good deal today. That's why I'm a little bit soused." My father repeated the same sentence for years, and my mom believed that one day there really would be a good deal. She would open the front door, and ask both of them to come in. "Mr. Mietek, will you care for some tea and a fresh baked bun?" she would say. She knew father needed an audience sometimes, and she didn't want him to bother our other neighbors. "Marek, it's 5:30. You have to get up," she said that day. There was the smell of oatmeal coming from the kitchen. This is what I had for breakfast every day, oatmeal and soft-boiled egg, while looking out the window at the trees along the riverbank and the morning trains passing by in the distance. In the winter of 1970, the snow covered the world around my house in a different manner. Everything became an unrecognizable silence. Even the church bell sounded in a different muffled tone. I liked to go for walks by myself, and I always went to the river, even when it was covered with ice. I would just go there and watch the trains on the other side. Enormous locomotives moved silently in thick white clouds of steam and high fountains of snow, shooting up on both sides of the plow in front. There was nothing more beautiful on earth than the snow thrown up by the plow, so high up in the speed that it was higher than the locomotive itself. The force of the engine cutting through meters of snow with no sound except for a very gentle huffing, unless, of course, they used the whistle. The snow throw up created perfectly arched, smooth walls on both sides of the plow, jumping up and running on the sides in a huge letter V. I dreamed of standing on the train tracks in front of the train coming towards me and seeing the perfectly shaped V, soft, written in cursive, massive banks of snow, and the silence. I always wonder how come it moved so silently. The snow changed everything. The snow muffled the world. My mother knew how fascinated I was with the trains. She used to warn me often, stay away from the train tracks. The day before she said something else. Maybe because she noticed my interest in trains had become stronger. Maybe because I told her I would go on the other side of the river one day and just look on the trains up close. I don't know. But that day, the Vice Prime Minister Stanisław Kociołek announced on the evening news that shipyard workers in Gdynia should go back to work the next day, and that agreement between the workers and the government had been reached. After the news, she told me never to go near the train tracks. Don't go there. There is death waiting, she said quietly. Her eyes became round like two coins, round and gray like the deepest waters of the ocean in my favorite book. I told her I wouldn't go, and I gave her a hug from the side. She was sitting on a chair with her arms on a table. I hugged her from the side because there was no place on her lap for me. It was taken by my brother in her belly. I always thought, my brother. Sometimes she would let me listen to my brother's heartbeat. Put your ear here, she would say, pointing to a spot on a globe she was carrying. And I would stop breathing with my eyes closed and my ear pressed to her belly. Then she would embrace me tightly, one hand on my back, the other on my head. "Let's see if we can synchronize our hearts," she would whisper. We waited, all three of us, and then we could hear a wave of light, or maybe the wind, and our hearts became one. The excerpt is much longer, but the ending is not happy ending, so I will stop here. Thank you again, everyone, for coming.